When Leah Marlowe, a young waitress working the late shift at a crowded nightclub, stepped onto the floor that night, she expected nothing more than another exhausting routine. She carried trays, smiled at customers, and tried her best to stay unnoticed, moving quietly through the noise and lights. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but as the hours passed, something inside her began to collapse. Her legs weakened, her vision blurred, and before she could reach for support, her body gave out. She didn't even have the strength to call for help. She never expected that the first person to reach her would be Adrian Castell, a powerful and feared millionaire whose presence alone made people step aside. But when he caught her before she hit the ground, the look in his eyes was not cold or distant. It was shock. It was recognition. It was fear. As he held her, he saw something that no one else noticed. Marks of suffering, signs of control, and the same silent cry for help he once ignored in his sister Sophia, before losing her forever. But what exactly did Adrian see in Leah's collapse that shook him so deeply? What truth was hiding behind the fear in her eyes? And why did a simple moment in a nightclub awaken a trauma he had buried for years? Before we continue, get ready. This story is not just about a fall. It's about the moment that changed both of their lives forever. She had been working for hours, moving from one table to another without a single break, and the pressure of the night kept getting heavier on her shoulders. The club was loud, crowded, and full of people demanding her attention at every moment. Leah tried to keep her focus, but her body felt weaker with every step she took. Her vision blurred, her breathing became uneven, and her legs trembled as if they could no longer hold her weight. She blinked several times, hoping the dizziness would pass, but it only grew stronger. The noise of the club seemed to fade in and out, and the lights looked too bright for her tired eyes. She reached for a tray, but her fingers slipped, and the sound of glasses clattering echoed around her. Before she could react, her knees gave out. She did not feel herself falling. Everything simply went dark as her body collapsed in the middle of the salon, right in front of customers who barely noticed her struggling. Her exhaustion had reached the limit she had been hiding for too long, and her body finally shut down in the only way it could. As she fell, someone moved faster than anyone else in the room. Adrian Castell, who had been seated nearby, stood up as soon as he saw her body tilt forward. He reached her before she hit the ground and caught her in his arms. His reaction surprised even himself, because he was not a man who usually rushed to help anyone. His expression, normally controlled and unreadable, shifted into something tense and shaken. He held her carefully, trying to steady her limp body, and felt the weight of someone who had pushed beyond their limits. The club continued as if nothing had happened, music playing and people laughing, unaware of what had just occurred. But Adrian's attention was completely on Leah. His heart pounded in a way he did not expect, and a cold wave spread through his chest as he realized how fragile she felt. Her skin was cold, her breathing shallow, and her face looked pale and exhausted. In that moment, everything else disappeared. All he saw was a young woman collapsing right in front of him, and something inside him refused to ignore it. The scene struck Adrian with a force he had not felt in years. The way Leah's body dropped, the softness of her weakened breathing, the helplessness in her face. It all mirrored a memory he wished he could erase. His sister Sophia had collapsed in almost the same way, on a night when she had tried to escape the abuse she was suffering. Adrian had found her too late that time, lying on the ground, just as defenseless as Leah was now. That moment had never stopped haunting him. Holding Leah brought that memory crashing back, raw and sharp. His chest tightened with a mix of fear and anger because he knew exactly what that kind of collapse meant. It was not something caused by a bad meal or a missed step. It was the kind of fall that came from exhaustion, fear and pain, piling up until the body could no longer carry it. Seeing Leah like that reopened a wound he had never healed. He felt his jaw tense as he fought the surge of emotions he usually kept buried behind his cold reputation. Still holding her, Adrian looked down at her face, noticing the heavy shadows under her eyes and the tightness in her expression, even while unconscious. Those details were impossible to ignore. They reminded him too much of Sophia's last months, when she tried to pretend everything was fine while silently falling apart. He brushed a loose strand of hair away from Leah's face, not out of affection, but because he needed to see her clearly. The similarities were overwhelming, and he hated that feeling. He hated how easily memories could pull him backward, yet he could not look away from Leah. The way she collapsed did not look accidental. It looked like someone who had been pushed beyond her limits for a long time. And deep inside, he already knew what kind of situation usually caused that. His sister had tried to hide her suffering as well, insisting she was fine, pretending nothing was wrong until her body finally revealed the truth. Adrian recognized the signs now, even before thinking too deeply about them. This was not just fatigue. Something had been happening to this girl long before she hit the floor. Adrian's mind worked quickly as he held her closer, checking her pulse and trying to steady her breathing. She was alive but barely conscious. She looked like someone who had been carrying a burden far too big for her. He scanned the room again, noticing how no one paid attention to what had happened. People kept drinking, talking, and laughing, unaware of how serious this moment felt to him. It frustrated him, but it also confirmed something important. Leah had been suffering in silence, surrounded by people who never noticed. That realization made the situation even clearer. Someone like her did not collapse out of nowhere. It took months of fear, stress, and pressure to reach this point. In his chest, a feeling grew stronger. The same mix of guilt and urgency he had felt with Sophia. He could not let this turn into another tragedy. He refused to stand by and watch someone else break without help. Not again. Not this time. At that moment, Adrian understood with complete certainty. Leah was not just tired. She was in danger. Real danger. The kind that was invisible to most people, but painfully familiar to him. He could almost sense the weight of whatever she had been carrying. Her trembling hands, her shallow breaths, the defeat in her posture, they were signs he could not ignore. He lifted her carefully into his arms, his decision made without hesitation. He would not let her fall again. He would not let her return to whatever had pushed her to this point. As he walked with her, he felt the old anger rising from the memory of Sophia, mixing with something new, a determination he had not felt in a long time. If he had failed once, he would not fail a second time. He did not know Leah, but that did not matter. What mattered was that she needed help, and he was not going to look away. Not this time. Leah woke up slowly, still dazed from the moment she had collapsed. She tried to sit up, brushing off the worry in her eyes, as if nothing serious had happened. The first thing she did was apologize, even though she had done nothing wrong. Her voice was weak, and she avoided looking at Adrian for more than a second. She insisted that she was fine, repeating it several times as if saying the words could make them true. She tried to stand, but her legs shook, and she had to hold onto the edge of the seat to keep from falling again. Adrian watched every small gesture she made, noticing how tense her shoulders were and how quickly she flinched at sudden sounds. None of her reactions looked normal. She acted like someone who expected to be blamed for something, even when nothing had happened. Her instinct to hide her discomfort was obvious. Every time she opened her mouth, she tried to downplay her condition, trying to convince both him and herself that she only needed to rest for a minute, and then she would return to work. But her eyes, tired and worried, told a different story. Adrian stayed quiet at first, but his eyes studied her face, her arms, and the way she held herself. He noticed the faint marks along her skin, the kind someone might try to cover up or explain away. They were small, but not subtle. He also saw the way she tightened her hands in her lap, as if preparing for something she feared. Her breathing shifted whenever he moved slightly closer, not because he scared her, but because she was used to reacting that way around people. It reminded him too much of the behavior Sophia had shown during her last months. It was the same pattern, someone who was always waiting for the next moment of anger, the next accusation, the next punishment. Leah sat there pretending she was calm, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted toward the door, toward the walls, toward anything that was not him. It was the behavior of someone who had learned to live on alert. Adrian felt pressure growing in his chest because these signs were impossible to ignore. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm but firm. He asked if she was hurt, but Leah quickly denied it, shaking her head too fast. She said she was only tired, that the night had been long, and that sometimes she skipped meals. Her excuses were rehearsed, almost automatic. Adrian did not believe them. He saw how her voice trembled slightly when she answered. She refused to meet his eyes for more than a moment. Every part of her body language showed fear she was trying hard to hide. He leaned back slightly, giving her space so she would not feel cornered. He told her she could take a moment to breathe, that no one expected her to rush. Still, she kept insisting she needed to return to work, even though she could not even stand steadily. Adrian recognized this behavior too well. It was the behavior of someone who had been trained to ignore their own limits. It was painful to watch. He felt a familiar mixture of frustration and sadness as he realized she had probably been living like this for a long time. He offered her help carefully, not wanting to overwhelm her. He suggested she sit and rest longer, maybe drink some water, maybe take a break in a quieter place. But Leah shook her head each time, rejecting the idea before he even finished speaking. She seemed afraid of accepting anything, not because she thought he would hurt her, but because she seemed terrified of depending on anyone. Adrian spoke gently, telling her she should not push herself, but she kept insisting she was fine. He could see how uncomfortable she felt with kindness, as if it was something she did not know how to receive. He tried again, telling her that collapsing was a serious sign and she should not ignore it. Her reaction was immediate. She looked down, her whole expression tightening like she expected to be scolded. Her fear was so clear that it made him pause. It reminded him of Sophia again, and the way she always tried to hide her pain so she wouldn't worry him. He felt his chest tighten as he watched Leah do the exact same thing. Adrian realized then that this situation was deeper than he thought. Leah was not simply tired. She was afraid. Afraid of being a problem, afraid of being noticed, afraid of what might happen if someone saw the truth she was hiding. Her behavior was too familiar to him. He had seen this type of fear destroy someone he loved, and he had spent years wishing he had acted sooner. The more he watched Leah, the more certain he became that she was not safe in her own life. Even though she refused to admit anything, her body language revealed everything she would not say. Her silence said more than her words. Adrian felt the old bitterness of regret rise inside him. He knew what ignoring the signs had cost him once, and he knew he could not make the same mistake again, not when the signs were this clear, not when someone else was sitting in front of him with the same quiet desperation. Even though Leah resisted, Adrian felt a strong sense of responsibility settling over him. It was not something he chose consciously. It came from the unresolved guilt he had carried since Sophia died. He could not look at Leah and pretend nothing was wrong, not when the signs were right in front of him. Her fear, her excuses, the marks she tried to hide, everything pointed to a life she did not feel safe in. He told himself he was only trying to help because anyone would do the same. But he knew that was not true. Most people would walk away. Most people already had, but he could not. He had failed to protect someone before, someone he loved deeply, and that loss had shaped him in ways he still struggled to understand. Looking at Leah now, he felt that same pull inside him, that same instinct to step in before it was too late. He did not know her story yet, but he felt the weight of it all the same, and for reasons he could not fully explain, he knew he would not stand by and watch her break. Leah had barely recovered enough strength to stand when the atmosphere around her suddenly shifted. She was still trying to steady her breathing and convince herself she could return to work when a familiar voice cut through the noise of the club. Her entire body froze before she even turned around. Her ex stood in the entrance, scanning the room with a tense expression, and when his eyes found her, his face twisted with anger. Leah instinctively stepped back, her hands shaking, and her eyes lowered to the floor. She didn't call out, didn't argue, didn't even try to explain. She reacted like someone who had learned that speaking only made things worse. He walked toward her with quick, angry steps, ignoring everyone around him. When he reached her, he grabbed her arm without hesitation, tightening his grip as if she belonged to him. Leah winced, but didn't fight back. She looked small, cornered, and terrified. Her ex didn't ask if she was all right or why she had collapsed earlier. He simply acted as if she had disobeyed him by working late or by not answering a message. The fear in her eyes said everything. She didn't want to go with him. Adrian saw the entire scene unfold from only a few steps away, and his expression hardened instantly. The way the man grabbed Leah, the way she shrank under his touch, the anger on his face. Adrian recognized all of it. It was the same kind of behavior he had seen years ago when Sophia was still alive. The same signs of control, intimidation, and quiet fear. He felt something inside him tighten with a familiar mixture of anger and disbelief. Before he even thought about it, he stepped forward and placed himself between Leah and the man, moving with calm but firm intention. He didn't raise his voice or make any sudden gestures, but his presence alone forced the man to let go of her arm. Leah took a small step behind Adrian, clearly shaken. Adrian kept his eyes on the ex, assessing him silently. He didn't need an explanation from anyone. The situation was painfully clear. Leah's ex glared at Adrian as if he had no right to interfere, but Adrian didn't move away. He stood firmly, showing that he wouldn't allow the man to take her. The ex, irritated by Adrian's interruption, tried to step forward again, raising his voice slightly as he demanded that Leah leave with him. He spoke as if he had ownership over her, not as if she had any choice. His anger grew when he saw that she didn't immediately obey. He pointed at her, blaming her for making a scene and accusing her of acting out. His words didn't match the situation at all, but they matched the behavior of someone who needed control and reacted violently whenever they lost it. Leah kept her head down, her breathing uneven. Adrian listened carefully and saw the pattern more clearly. With every word, the man spoke. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an argument. This was someone who believed he still had power over her. As Adrian watched, he saw the same tone, the same threatening posture, the same dismissive attitude he had seen before in the man who had destroyed his sister's life. It was a moment that hit him harder than he expected, and he couldn't ignore it. The ex leaned closer, ignoring Adrian's presence as he hissed at Leah that she would pay for trying to escape him. His voice was low but sharp enough to make Leah flinch. The threat was not empty. It carried the same weight of someone who had punished her before and fully intended to do it again. Adrian heard every word and felt a surge of anger he hadn't felt in years. The memory of Sophia, broken and scared, came rushing back to him. He had missed the signs back then. He had trusted the wrong people, believed the wrong explanations, and by the time he understood the truth, it was too late. Now, hearing the same type of threat directed at Leah, he felt something inside him snap into total clarity. This was not a situation he could walk away from. The man's words alone confirmed everything he already suspected. Adrian stepped even closer, his posture calm, but unmistakably protective. He didn't need to shout or make a scene. His presence alone created a barrier between Leah and her ex. The man tried to argue, but Adrian didn't let him get another word out. With a steady tone, he made it clear that Leah was not leaving with him. He didn't threaten violence, but the firmness in his voice left no room for negotiation. The ex backed up slightly, realizing that Adrian was not someone he could intimidate. But instead of walking away quietly, he pointed at Leah once more, repeating his threat with more anger. He claimed she would regret this, that she would not get away from him. Leah's hands shook as she listened, and Adrian watched her reaction closely, reading the fear she tried to hide. The entire club continued its usual noise, unaware of the tension happening in the corner. But to Adrian, the moment felt heavy and unmistakably serious. When the ex finally stepped back, still furious, Adrian kept himself between them until the man left the club. Only then did he turn to Leah. Her eyes were unfocused, and her breathing was shaky. She wasn't relieved. She was scared of what would happen next. Adrian understood that feeling too well. He knew that letting her leave the club alone would be the worst decision he could make. Her ex had shown exactly who he was and what he intended. Adrian also understood that this wasn't just a moment of conflict. It was part of a much larger pattern. He looked at Leah and saw someone who had been living under fear for a long time, someone who had no safe place to go back to. And at that moment, he understood something clearly. He could not allow her to return home with a man like that waiting for her. The danger was too real, too familiar, too close to repeating a tragedy he had already lived once. He refused to let it happen again. Adrian guided Leah out of the club with steady steps, keeping a small but careful distance so she wouldn't feel trapped. Even so, she hesitated the entire way, stopping more than once as if she wanted to turn back. She kept saying she didn't want to cause trouble, that she could handle things on her own, and that she shouldn't leave with him. But her voice shook, and each time she tried to step away, Adrian calmly redirected her forward. He wasn't forceful, but he was firm. He had seen enough to know she wasn't safe, and he wasn't willing to let her return to a situation that had already pushed her past her limit. Leah's resistance was more emotional than physical. She didn't try to pull away completely, but her eyes showed uncertainty, fear, and exhaustion. She looked like someone who didn't know how to accept help. Adrian didn't rush her. He walked slowly, giving her time to breathe and adjust. Still, he knew she might panic if he left her alone for even a moment, so he stayed close. By the time they reached the quiet place he had chosen, Leah was too tired to argue anymore. Her steps had become unsteady, and her voice had faded to almost nothing. Once inside the safe space, Adrian watched Leah closely. She didn't relax, not even for a second. She stood near the door, as if unsure whether she should sit, leave, or simply disappear. She kept apologizing, saying she didn't mean to bother him, saying she didn't want to drag anyone into her problems. Her shoulders were tense, and she held her hands together tightly. Adrian understood that this wasn't stubbornness. This was fear. She was afraid of the consequences of accepting help. She was afraid of what her ex might do, and she was afraid of depending on anyone because that had never worked out for her in the past. Adrian took a slow breath before speaking, trying to find a way to reach her without making her feel pressured. He told her she didn't have to thank him or explain anything. He said she had been through enough for one night, and what mattered was that she was somewhere safe. Leah listened, but she didn't fully believe she deserved safety. Adrian could see it in the way she kept her eyes down. She was too used to feeling alone. After a long pause, Adrian spoke again, but this time with a different tone. He told her something he had never shared with anyone outside his closest circle. He told her about his sister, Sophia. He explained that years ago she had shown similar signs, the same fear, the same exhaustion, the same attempts to pretend everything was normal. He admitted that he had ignored the signs at first, thinking she could handle things on her own, or that the situation wasn't as serious as it seemed. His voice stayed steady, but there was a noticeable heaviness behind it. He told Leah that by the time he realized how much danger his sister was truly in, it had been too late to save her. Leah lifted her eyes for the first time since they arrived. The sadness in Adrian's voice was clear, but so was the regret. He wasn't trying to scare her or control her. He was telling her the truth about why he couldn't leave her alone. For him, seeing her collapse, seeing her terrified, seeing her try to hide everything, it all connected to a loss he still carried. Hearing that changed something in Leah. She had expected him to be like other people who tried to dominate or decide things for her, but his explanation didn't come from a place of authority. It came from a place of pain. He wasn't trying to take control of her life. He was trying to avoid repeating a mistake that haunted him. Leah didn't know what to say at first. She looked at him with a mixture of confusion and understanding. She didn't fully relax, but her expression softened. She realized that Adrian's actions tonight weren't about power or trying to take over her decisions. He was reacting to something he had lived through and never healed from. For the first time, Leah felt that his concern wasn't about himself. It was about preventing someone else from suffering the same fate as his sister. That realization made her chest tighten in a different way. It made her see him, not as a controlling figure, but as someone who genuinely didn't want to see harm come to her. But even with that understanding, accepting help was not easy for Leah. She had spent so long trying to survive on her own that relying on anyone felt dangerous. She worried that staying here would make things worse. She worried that her ex would blame her even more. She worried that Adrian would eventually see her as a burden. All these thoughts ran through her mind, making her shift uncomfortably. Adrian noticed her hesitation and reminded her calmly that he wasn't asking for trust or promises. He wasn't trying to take her freedom. He simply didn't believe she should go back to a place where she might be hurt again. Leah listened, torn between fear and exhaustion. She rubbed her hands together, her eyes glossy with the weight of everything she had gone through. Her voice cracked slightly as she said she didn't want to cause any more problems. Adrian answered that protecting her wasn't a problem for him. It was a responsibility he was choosing, not out of obligation, but because he didn't want history to repeat itself. By now, Leah could barely keep herself standing. The emotional weight, combined with the physical exhaustion from earlier, left her drained. She knew she didn't have the strength to go back to her home or face her ex again tonight. She knew she wouldn't sleep safely or even rest for more than a moment if she left. Adrian didn't push her, but he stayed nearby, waiting patiently for her to make the decision herself. Slowly, Leah let out a long breath and nodded. It wasn't a confident yes, but it was a yes that came from a place of understanding she had no safe alternative. She agreed to stay temporarily, just for the night, reminding him it was only because she had no other option. Adrian accepted her words without questioning her. He simply told her that she could rest here, that no one would come near her, and that she didn't need to pretend she was fine. For the first time since collapsing, Leah allowed herself to sit down. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for this moment, she allowed herself to stay in a place where she wasn't afraid. When she finally settled, a small part of her felt relieved, even if she wouldn't admit it out loud. She wasn't used to being somewhere she didn't have to keep her guard up. Adrian didn't hover or pressure her. He simply stayed nearby, giving her space while making it clear she wasn't alone. For him, the decision to protect her wasn't complicated. It came from a deep place in his memory, a part of him that still wished he could go back in time and save his sister. Watching Leah now, tired and scared, made that regret sharper, but also gave him a chance to act differently this time. Leah didn't fully understand the depth of his emotions yet, but she could see enough to know he wasn't pretending. She sat there, slowly calming down, realizing she had stepped into a situation she didn't completely understand, but also didn't fear as she feared her past. As she closed her eyes for a moment, she accepted one simple truth. For the first time in a long time, she was somewhere safe, and even though it scared her to depend on anyone, she stayed. Leah sat quietly for a long time, trying to find the courage to speak. She kept looking at her hands, playing with the edge of her sleeve, unsure of how much she should say. But the silence between them did not feel heavy or threatening. It felt like a space where she could finally breathe. Little by little, she began to talk about the things she had been hiding for months. Her voice was soft at first, almost uncertain, as if she expected him to doubt her. She explained how the abuse had started slowly, with small comments meant to control her. She told him how it grew into constant pressure, blame, and fear. She described the days when she felt trapped, the nights when she didn't sleep, and the moments when she thought the situation might finally break her. As she spoke, her voice trembled, but she kept going because once she started, it was impossible to stop. For the first time, she felt like someone was truly listening. Adrian didn't interrupt, didn't question her, and didn't look away. His calm, steady attention made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. When Leah finally paused, unsure if she had said too much, Adrian spoke with a level of honesty he rarely allowed himself to show. He told her about Sophia, not with dramatic words, but with quiet truth. He explained that his sister had also tried to hide what she was going through and how he had ignored the signs because he didn't understand the seriousness at the time. He confessed that by the time he realized how much pain she was in, it had been too late. His voice remained steady, but the pain behind it was unmistakable. He talked about how losing her had changed him, how it left a mark on him that never faded. He explained that her death didn't just hurt, it shaped who he became. Leah listened carefully, realizing that the cold and controlled man she had first met was someone who had learned to shut down his emotions to survive the weight of his grief. She saw that his concern for her wasn't pity or obligation. It came from something real and deeply personal. As the conversation continued, something shifted between them. They both understood that they were sharing parts of themselves they didn't normally share with anyone. Adrian wasn't trying to fix Leah's life or tell her what she should have done. He simply let her speak and allowed his own guard to fall as well. Leah felt herself relaxing in small ways she didn't expect. She no longer feared being judged or blamed. She felt heard. For someone who had lived so long without support, this felt unfamiliar but comforting. Adrian, on the other hand, felt something he hadn't felt in years, a desire to protect someone, not because he had failed before, but because he genuinely cared. He wasn't looking at Leah through the lens of his sister's memory anymore. He was seeing her for who she was, someone strong, scared, and trying to survive. Leah looked at him with new understanding. She had always believed that talking about her situation would only make things worse, but now she realized how freeing it felt to say the truth out loud. She could see that Adrian wasn't overwhelmed or impatient. Instead, he seemed more present than ever. She noticed the way he listened to every word and how his expression softened when she described some of the hardest moments she had lived through. She felt something inside her loosen, a knot she had carried for too long. This wasn't someone who doubted her or minimized her pain. It was someone who believed her without hesitation. That alone made her chest tighten in a way she didn't expect. She realized how deeply she had needed someone to simply understand. Adrian also felt something inside him shifting. For years, he had kept people at a distance, afraid of letting himself care too much. But listening to Leah speak awakened a protective instinct that didn't come from guilt or obligation. It came from a connection he didn't fully understand yet. He didn't see her as someone broken. He saw her as someone incredibly strong, someone who had survived things she shouldn't have had to face. And in her vulnerability, he felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with making up for past mistakes. It felt natural, almost easy to want to be there for her. He didn't feel the cold panic he usually felt when people got close. Instead, he felt a calm control, a steady determination to support her in whatever way she allowed. By the time the conversation reached its natural end, something undeniable had formed between them. They didn't need to say it out loud, but they both felt it. Leah no longer saw Adrian as just a powerful man stepping into her life. She saw someone who understood pain in a way that matched her own. Someone who listened without demanding anything in return. Adrian, in turn, found himself looking at Leah not as a reminder of his sister, but as a person whose presence brought something warm back into his life. Their shared experiences, their confessions, and their honesty created a bond that neither of them had expected. It wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was something deeper, two wounded people recognizing each other's pain and finding comfort in the connection. Neither of them knew what would come next, but for the first time, they both felt less alone. Leah tried to return to a normal routine, but it quickly became clear that things were far from normal. It started with small moments that were easy to dismiss, like seeing her ex standing across the street or noticing him near the club entrance. At first, she tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, but it wasn't. Every time she looked over her shoulder, he seemed to be there, watching her with the same angry expression he had shown the night he tried to drag her away. She began to change her routes, avoid certain places and walk faster whenever she sensed someone behind her. Yet no matter what she did, the feeling of being followed never left. Her anxiety grew each day, and even simple tasks became difficult. She barely slept, afraid of what he might do next. She knew he wasn't just angry, he wanted control back, and he didn't care what it took to get it. The fear she had carried for so long returned even stronger, making her feel trapped again. She knew he wasn't going to stop on his own. He wanted her back, and he was willing to use threats and intimidation to make it happen. Adrian noticed the change in her almost immediately. Leah was jumpy, quieter than usual, and constantly scanning her surroundings. When he asked her directly what was happening, she hesitated, but her silence said enough. Adrian had seen this behavior before, and it reminded him painfully of his sister's last months. He refused to let history repeat itself. As soon as he understood that her ex was stalking her, he acted quickly and decisively. He increased the security around her, making sure someone reliable was always nearby, even when she didn't notice. He made calls to people from his past, contacts he usually avoided but trusted when it came to situations like this. These were people who understood danger, people who dealt with threats quietly and efficiently. Adrian didn't enjoy involving them again, but he didn't hesitate either. Leah's safety mattered more than his comfort. He didn't tell her everything he was doing, knowing it would overwhelm her, but he made sure she understood one thing clearly. She was not facing this alone anymore. Even with Adrian's precautions, the tension between them grew heavier with each passing day. Leah hated feeling like she needed protection, but she also knew she could no longer pretend she wasn't in danger. The fear she carried made it hard for her to relax, and sometimes she felt guilty for relying on Adrian so much. But Adrian didn't see her as a burden. He saw someone who had been hurt for too long and needed support. Still, every time he saw her flinch at sudden sounds or lose focus because she thought she saw her ex, Adrian felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. He had never forgotten how powerless he felt when he failed to protect his sister. Watching Leah suffer stirred up that old rage, but now, unlike back then, he had the resources and determination to act. He reassured her as best as he could, telling her she was safe, but deep down, he knew her ex was unpredictable, and unpredictability was dangerous. What made the situation even more complicated was that Adrian's actions didn't go unnoticed. The people he contacted were part of a world he had tried to distance himself from, but they still respected him. They also understood that if Adrian was suddenly asking for help, something serious was happening. Word began to spread that Adrian Castell had a weakness, someone he wanted to protect at any cost. This kind of information traveled quickly, especially among people who had been waiting for an opportunity to hit him where it hurt. Adrian had made many enemies over the years, people who would gladly use anything against him. When they realized that Leah mattered to him, they saw a possible opening. To them, Leah wasn't a person, she was leverage. And leverage was something powerful, something they could use to threaten him or force him into decisions he didn't want to make. Leah had no idea that Adrian's enemies were becoming aware of her existence. All she saw was Adrian becoming more serious, more focused, and more protective. She sensed the tension, but didn't fully understand the danger surrounding them. She only knew her ex was becoming more aggressive in his attempts to get close to her, and she felt guilty for dragging Adrian into such a mess. But Adrian didn't see it that way. He never blamed her, not even for a second. Instead, he grew more determined to shield her from everything. Her ex, the fear she carried, and now the shadows from his past that were slowly moving closer. He didn't tell her about the added threats, not wanting to scare her further, but the weight of them pressed heavily on him. He knew that protecting her wasn't just about dealing with one man anymore. It was becoming something bigger, something that touched parts of his life he had hoped to keep buried. As the days went on, the situation reached a new level of danger. Adrian understood that her ex was not stopping, and he also understood that others were watching closely. Leah's safety had become more complicated than either of them expected. Adrian found himself constantly on alert, watching for signs of danger, not only from her ex, but from people who might use her as a way to get to him. For the first time in years, he felt truly vulnerable. Not because he was afraid for himself, but because he feared losing her the way he had lost Sophia. That fear pushed him to act faster, plan better, and stay ahead of any threat. Leah, still unaware of the full picture, relied more and more on Adrian's presence. She didn't want to, but she needed the sense of safety he gave her. And even though neither of them spoke about it out loud, their lives had now become tightly connected by fear, danger, and an unspoken bond that grew stronger with every day they faced together. Leah had been sensing for days that there was something Adrian wasn't telling her. He was protective and calm on the surface, but there were moments when his expression changed, moments when he spoke in a tone that felt too controlled. One night, while he stepped away to take a call, she overheard enough to understand that the people he was dealing with were not ordinary business contacts. His voice was low, tense, and direct, and the words he used made her stomach twist. When he returned, she didn't confront him immediately, but the worry in her eyes was hard to hide. Later, she began putting small pieces together, the way he always knew where her ex had been, the fast way he could get information, the people who stepped aside when he walked through the club. Little by little, she realized that the power he had didn't come from clean, simple business. It came from places much darker. She didn't want to believe it, but she couldn't ignore the signs anymore. And when she finally understood that Adrian had connections to criminal groups and dangerous dealings, her heart tightened with fear. She didn't know what scared her more, her ex or the world Adrian was involved in. Adrian noticed the change in her right away. She stopped meeting his eyes as easily, and she kept more distance between them than before. He felt the shift and knew exactly why it was happening. For years, he had built walls around himself, choosing to work with dangerous people because he believed it made him untouchable after losing his sister. He had convinced himself that vulnerability was a weakness he couldn't afford. But now, with Leah in his life, those choices were coming back to haunt him. When he saw the fear in her expression, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, worry that he might lose someone he cared about. He wanted to explain everything, but he didn't know how to do it without making things worse. He feared that if she saw the full truth of who he was and what he had done, she would walk away before he had the chance to protect her. When Leah finally questioned him, her voice was careful but trembling. She didn't accuse him or shout. She simply asked if what she suspected was true. Adrian didn't lie. He couldn't. He admitted that after Sophia died, he changed completely. He told her that he turned to dangerous alliances because he believed power was the only way to protect the people he cared about. His honesty wasn't defensive. It was heavy, almost painful. He didn't try to make himself look better or justify his choices. He told her he knew those choices were dark, but at the time, he had felt he had no other way to survive his grief. Leah listened quietly, surprised by how open he was. Hearing him admit his mistakes made her heart soften, even as her fear remained. She understood that he wasn't proud of those connections. He was someone who had been broken once and had rebuilt himself in the only way he knew how. Still, the truth frightened her. She had escaped one dangerous man only to find safety with another kind of danger. It made her wonder if she had stepped out of one shadow and into another without realizing it. But the more she looked at Adrian, the more she noticed things that didn't match the image of a cold, dangerous man. His concern for her was real, his regret for the past. was real. And behind all the power and control, there was a man who had been deeply hurt and was trying, in his own imperfect way, to protect someone again. She didn't excuse his choices, but she began to understand them. She saw that his darkness didn't come from cruelty, it came from pain. And that understanding made her feel conflicted rather than terrified. Adrian felt the conflict inside her and blamed himself. He feared that by letting her close, he had put her in a world she never asked to be part of. He was afraid she would look at him and see only a man surrounded by danger. Yet he also realized that he didn't want to hide from her. For the first time in years, he wanted someone to truly see him. Not the powerful man, not the feared figure, but the person who carried too much regret. He told her he understood if she wanted distance. He didn't try to convince her or manipulate her. He simply said he would accept whatever decision she made, even if it hurt him. Those words surprised Leah because they didn't sound like the controlling tones she had grown used to in her past. They sounded honest. As they sat together in the quiet room, neither knowing what to say next, Leah looked at Adrian with new eyes. He was not perfect. He was not safe in the traditional sense, but he was trying. She could see the effort behind every word, every decision, every moment he chose to be gentle instead of cold. She saw a man who'd been shaped by tragedy, but was fighting to be better than his past. And even though part of her feared the world he was connected to, another part of her trusted the man sitting in front of her. It was a confusing mix of emotions, but one thing was clear. She didn't want to walk away, not yet. Not when she could see how much he needed someone to believe he wasn't only the darkness he had created. Leah had been trying to keep her days calm, but underneath the surface, she felt the tension growing. She noticed her ex becoming more confident, appearing in places where she did not expect him. She tried to stay close to safe areas, but even then she felt watched. What she didn't know was that her ex had found someone willing to help him, a man who already held a grudge against Adrian. Together, they planned to use Leah as a way to strike at Adrian. One evening, when she stepped outside for a moment of fresh air, everything happened too fast. A hand grabbed her from behind, pulling her toward a quiet area where no one could see. She tried to scream, but her voice was muffled. Her ex stood in front of her with a cold expression, and before she could react, they forced her into a car and closed the door. Panic spread through her body. She understood immediately that this wasn't just another threat. This was something far more serious. And while she fought to stay calm, one question ran through her mind. What would Adrian do when he found out? When Adrian heard that Leah was missing, he froze for a moment, unable to breathe as the shock hit him. The panic he felt was immediate and overwhelming. It was the same fear he had felt the night his sister disappeared. His chest tightened as if the air had been stolen from him. But unlike years ago, he refused to stay frozen. He forced himself to move, to think, to act. He contacted everyone he trusted, even people he preferred not to deal with anymore. He didn't care about the risks or what he would owe later. He just needed to find her. His voice was sharp and urgent as he demanded information, and he made it clear that anyone who delayed him would regret it. Inside, however, he felt something breaking. The fear of losing Leah was stronger than he expected. He realized how important she had become to him, how deeply he cared. The idea of her being in danger tore him apart. He knew one thing for certain: he would not let his past repeat itself. As hours passed without answers, Adrian's determination grew more fierce. His contacts began sending clues, but nothing was concrete. He pushed harder, calling in favors that he had promised never to use again. He didn't care about the consequences. He cared about reaching Leah before something irreversible happened. His enemies knew how to strike him, and they had chosen the most painful way. Adrian felt guilt mixing with anger. He had tried to protect her, yet she was now in the hands of the very people he wanted to shield her from. His mind kept returning to memories of his sister, how helpless he had felt when he couldn't find her in time. He remembered her collapse, the bruises, the quiet fear in her eyes. Now he imagined Leah in that same state, and the thought pushed him into a level of desperation he had never felt before. He would not let the same tragedy happen again, not with Leah, not when he had the power to fight back. Eventually, one of his contacts provided information that pointed to a possible location. Adrian didn't wait for backup. He moved immediately, driven only by the need to reach her. His mind focused completely on the steps ahead. When he arrived, everything inside him tightened with dread. The place was quiet, almost too quiet, but he didn't hesitate. He forced his way in, calling her name as his heart pounded painfully. Then he found her. Leah was tied, frightened, and shaken, but alive. Her eyes widened when she saw him. In that instant, relief washed over both of them, but there was no time to breathe. One of the men lunged at Adrian from behind. Adrian reacted on instinct, fighting with a mixture of fear and rage. He didn't care about strategy or caution. He just needed to protect her. The struggle was brutal, and even though Adrian fought with everything he had, he couldn't avoid the injury that followed. During the confrontation, Adrian was struck hard, a blow that made him stumble and lose strength. The pain was deep, sharp, and hard to ignore, but he forced himself to stay standing. He could not collapse. Not now. Leah saw him falter, and panic filled her eyes. She knew he was hurt, and she called out to him, begging him to stay awake. Adrian pushed through the pain, continuing the fight until the attackers were no longer a threat. His movements became slower, his breathing heavier, but he didn't stop until he was sure Leah was safe. As the danger faded, he turned to her with a weak but relieved expression. Leah rushed to him, terrified by how pale he looked. His legs finally gave out, and she caught him as best as she could. Adrian whispered that he was fine, even though he clearly wasn't. His only concern was her safety. But as she held him, she realized how close he had come to losing his life for her. When help finally arrived, Adrian was barely conscious. Leah stayed beside him, refusing to leave his side even for a second. She held his hand tightly, her own hands shaking. The sight of him injured cut deeper than she expected. She realized how much he had risked. His life, his influence, everything he had built, to save her. The fear she felt while watching him struggle to stay awake was overwhelming. She whispered his name repeatedly, trying to keep him alert. Adrian looked at her with tired eyes and tried to reassure her, but his voice was faint. In that moment, the reality hit both of them. The situation had not just been dangerous, it had come frighteningly close to another tragedy, one that echoed Adrian's past. Leah felt tears fill her eyes as she held on to him, silently begging him not to leave her. The weight of what happened made her realize how deeply connected they had become and how easily everything could have been lost. As Adrian was carried away for treatment, Leah followed, refusing to be separated from him. She felt shaken, exhausted, and terrified, but she stayed focused on him. She watched his breathing, his pale face, the blood on his clothes, and she knew how close they had come to something irreversible. She understood now why Adrian had been so protective. He wasn't just trying to keep her safe, he was fighting demons from his past. And tonight had almost proved his worst fear true. Leah held his hand tightly, refusing to let go. She whispered that he wasn't allowed to give up, not after everything they had survived. Watching him fight to stay awake broke her heart. She knew he had risked everything for her, and she realized that she had almost lost someone who had become incredibly important in her life. For the first time, she felt truly afraid of a world without him, and as she sat beside him, she understood that their lives had changed forever. Leah followed the paramedics through the hospital doors, with her heart racing and her hands trembling. She stayed close as they rushed Adrian into a room, watching helplessly as doctors surrounded him. His face was pale, and his breathing was weak, and for a moment she felt her legs shake under her. But she refused to sit, refused to look away, refused to break down. For the first time in her life, she did not run when things became overwhelming. She stayed exactly where she needed to be. next to him. Nurses asked her questions, but she barely heard them. All she could focus on was the man lying on the bed, fighting to stay alive after risking everything for her. She wanted to hold his hand, but they were working on him, placing IVs, checking his wounds, and giving orders she didn't understand. Every second felt like an hour. She kept whispering to herself, begging him in her mind to keep breathing. She remembered how he looked at her just before he collapsed, full of relief that she was safe. That memory alone kept her from falling apart. She wouldn't leave him now. She couldn't. Outside the room, police officers were already waiting to ask questions. They approached her carefully, but she could see suspicion in their eyes. They wanted to know what had happened, who attacked her, how Adrian got involved, and why things escalated the way they did. Leah answered as clearly as she could. Even though her voice shook, she told them her ex had taken her, that he wasn't alone, and that Adrian had saved her. She explained everything she witnessed, step by step. The officers kept pressing, trying to connect the attack to Adrian's past, asking if he had enemies she knew about. Leah didn't want to get into that, but she refused to let their questions turn Adrian into a villain. She defended him with everything she had, making it clear that he was the one who saved her life. The police wrote notes quickly, exchanging glances as if building a bigger picture. Leah didn't care. She just needed them to understand that Adrian wasn't the criminal in this situation. He was the reason she was still alive. When the media arrived, everything became harder. Cameras flashed, microphones were pushed toward her, and reporters demanded answers she wasn't ready to give. They wanted details about the kidnapping, about Adrian, about the fight that left him in critical condition. They wanted a story more than they wanted the truth. Leah felt overwhelmed, but she still refused to leave the hospital entrance. She stayed strong, repeating the same words whenever they shoved questions in her face. "He saved me." She didn't elaborate, didn't give them anything they could twist. But the reporters kept insisting, asking about Adrian's reputation, his connections, and the rumors surrounding his past. Leah's fear began to mix with anger. She had never confronted the press before, but now she stood firm. She wouldn't let them turn Adrian's sacrifice into something ugly. She forced herself to stay calm, repeating his name with respect, making sure they heard her clearly. Even though her voice wasn't loud, it was steady. She didn't run from them, and little by little, they began to back away. Not long after, the shadows of Adrian's past appeared in the hospital. Men she recognized from brief encounters, cold faces, serious expressions, stood in the hallway, watching her with unreadable eyes. She knew they weren't there for her. They were there because of Adrian. These were the kind of men who operated quietly, who didn't trust the police or the media, and who had the power to make problems disappear. Their presence made her nervous, but she didn't move. One of them approached her, asking what exactly had happened. She told him everything she knew, and in return, he shared something that made her blood run cold. The man who had helped her ex kidnap her wasn't just some random criminal. He had been connected to the same group that targeted Adrian's sister years ago. The same people who hurt Sophia had now tried to hurt Leah. Suddenly, everything made sense. Adrian's guilt, his anger, the emotional wound he never healed from. The truth hit Leah like a weight on her chest. She understood now why Adrian had built walls around himself, why he acted with such determination and fear when she was taken. He wasn't only protecting her because he cared. He was fighting a battle he believed he had already lost once. The pieces of his past aligned painfully with her present, and she felt her heart ache for him in a way she hadn't expected. He had been carrying that trauma alone for years, believing he had failed his sister, and believing he wasn't allowed to care for anyone again. And now she was caught in the middle of the same danger. Leah felt a rush of sadness and anger toward the men who had destroyed both their lives in different ways. But instead of fear, she felt stronger. She knew she couldn't control what happened next, but she would not let this break her or him. She would stay. Hours passed before the doctors finally spoke to her again. Adrian was stable, but still in critical condition. They allowed her into the room, and she walked slowly toward his bed. Seeing him hooked to machines made her chest tighten. She took a seat beside him and reached for his hand, holding it gently. His skin was warm, but he didn't move. For a moment, she let herself cry quietly, the tension of the day finally breaking through her calm. But even in tears, she didn't let go of his hand. She whispered to him that she wasn't going anywhere, that she wouldn't run like she used to. She promised him he wasn't alone. The room was quiet, but her presence was steady. She stayed by him through the night, refusing to leave even when nurses suggested she rest. She understood something important now. She wasn't just fighting for her safety anymore. She was fighting for him too. By the time morning arrived, Leah was exhausted but determined. She sat with her back straight, still holding Adrian's hand, ready to face whatever came next. She had confronted the police, endured the media, and stood her ground against the men from Adrian's past. She had learned more about the darkness surrounding them both, but instead of breaking her, it made her stronger. She knew now that Adrian had been carrying the weight of his sister's death for far too long, believing he had no right to care about someone again. But Leah was not going to let that story repeat itself. She was still scared, still fragile, but she wasn't running, not anymore. She looked at Adrian's face, pale but peaceful, and she whispered again, "You're not leaving me, not like this." And as she sat there, she realized she was no longer just surviving. She was choosing to fight for someone who had fought for her with everything he had. Adrian woke slowly, his mind foggy at first, as if he were trying to remember where he was. The bright hospital lights bothered him, and for a moment he felt lost, unsure of what had happened. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw Leah sitting beside him. She looked tired, as if she had barely slept, but her expression softened the moment their eyes met. She reached for his hand carefully, afraid of hurting him, and he felt her fingers tremble slightly. Realizing she had stayed by his side the entire time brought a deep sense of relief he couldn't put into words. He tried to speak, but his voice came out weak and rough. Leah told him not to rush, that he was safe now, and she would stay as long as he needed her. Seeing her there, choosing to sit through the fear, the noise, and the uncertainty, filled him with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. It didn't erase the pain, but it made him feel grounded again. For the first time, waking up didn't feel empty or cold. He wasn't alone, and he understood immediately that Leah had become someone essential in his life. As Adrian's strength slowly returned, he and Leah spoke honestly about everything that had happened. They both felt the weight of what they had survived, not just physically, but emotionally. Adrian admitted he had spent years hiding behind power, fear, and anger because he didn't know another way to protect himself from the grief of losing his sister. Leah listened patiently, understanding that his distance had never been about indifference. It was about pain he didn't know how to carry. In return, Leah shared how she had spent so long believing she didn't deserve safety or support, which made it difficult for her to accept help even when she needed it the most. Their conversations were slow and careful, but they were meaningful. Each word helped them understand each other better. They realized that even though they came from different worlds, they carried similar wounds. Instead of letting those wounds push them apart, they allowed them to be a bridge. They began to see a future where their pasts didn't control them anymore. When Adrian was finally able to leave the hospital, the first thing he did was make a decision he had been avoiding for years. He contacted the people involved in his darker dealings and told them he was stepping away permanently. It wasn't a simple task, and it wasn't without risk, but he knew he couldn't continue living in fear or violence. Leah's presence showed him that he didn't need that world anymore. He wanted to build something better, not just for himself, but for the memory of Sophia and for the life he hoped to share with Leah. He put his energy into creating a foundation in his sister's name, one that would help victims of violence find support, safety, and resources he wished Sophia had received. Working on the foundation gave him a sense of direction he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about power. This time, it was about healing. And in each step he took, Leah was beside him, encouraging him and reminding him that he was capable of choosing a different path. Leah also felt herself changing as the days passed. She wasn't the frightened, exhausted woman who had first collapsed in the club. Surviving everything she had gone through, the abuse, the fear, the kidnapping, forced her to discover a strength she never realized she had. Staying by Adrian's side in the hospital had proven to her that she wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding from the world or from herself. She chose to remain with him, not because she needed protection, but because she wanted to walk beside someone who understood pain and growth just as deeply as she did. Adrian encouraged her independence, and she appreciated that he didn't try to take control of her life. Instead, he treated her as an equal, someone whose voice mattered. With time, she began to imagine a future where she didn't have to live in fear, a future where she could make choices freely. Being with Adrian didn't trap her, it liberated her. One afternoon, when Adrian felt strong enough, he asked Leah to visit Sophia's memorial with him. The idea made him nervous, but he felt it was something he needed to face. Leah agreed immediately. They walked together through the quiet space, and Adrian stopped in front of his sister's name. He stood there for a long moment, breathing deeply, trying to gather the courage to speak. Leah didn't interrupt him. She simply held his hand and stayed close. Eventually, he told Sophia everything he had held inside for years. His guilt, his fear, his regrets, and his hope that she would be proud of the man he was trying to become. Leah watched him, feeling the weight of what this moment meant. When Adrian finished, he looked at her with a mixture of sadness and relief, as if a part of him had finally been freed. Standing there together made him feel like the cycle that had trapped him for so long was finally closing. As they left the memorial, Adrian felt lighter than he had in years. The world didn't seem as dark or heavy as before. He and Leah walked side by side, and for the first time, neither of them felt defined by their past. They knew there would still be challenges, healing, and days that felt harder than others, but they were ready to face them together. Their connection wasn't based on fear or pain anymore. It was built on understanding, trust, and the decision to move forward. Adrian looked at Leah with a quiet smile, and she returned it with the same certainty. They weren't broken people trying to survive separately anymore. They were two people reconstructing their lives, choosing hope, choosing healing, and choosing each other. And as they continued forward, it was clear that this was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of a life finally free from fear, shaped by growth, and ready to be lived fully. And that's where today's story ends. But remember, every ending in Muller Tales is just the beginning of another secret waiting to be uncovered. If you want more stories filled with twists, truths, and human emotions taken to the limit, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications, because here, no tale is ever what it seems. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter, where another life changes forever.